Hello and welcome to this extra episode of Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
Well, it is truly a historic week. MPs have voted in favour of the assisted dying bill. So we're bringing you this second podcast. Think of it as part two of the usual episode. So if you haven't listened to part one on this week's podcast, listen to that first to get up to speed. We're going to talk about the vote in the Commons that has just happened. So momentous. I actually quickly went to look back. We talked about how it had been voted down in 2015. It had been 20 years earlier since assisted dying was voted on before. So this is generally a decades-long battle for many people, and the vote has passed. Harriet, Ruth, who wants to go first? You must be delighted, both of you.
It is a huge moment, and I'm really pleased about it, but make no mistake that although, of course, it's got more parliamentary stages to go through, this is a milestone, a huge piece of socially liberalising legislation, up there with the vote to end capital punishment and up there with the vote to allow abortion. And that puts Kim Leadbeater, it makes her place in history. And I think there's been two remarkable women here. One is Kim Leadbeater, who the way she's brought this bill forward has been so respectful and so patient and so thoughtful, seeking for the commonalities between people rather than trying to build up her support and dividing lines. So the way Kim Leadbeater has brought it forward has been absolutely remarkable. But it also took Dame Esther Ranson's intervention, I think, to crystallise it, because the argument for assisted dying had been growing. But sometimes it takes one individual, a high-profile individual, to really be the catalyst to mean that it can be brought forward. So I think there's two really remarkable women here. One is Dame Esther and the other is Kim Leadbeater. And there's still going to be process underway, but it is a huge change.
I mean, Ruth, I actually was in Central Lobby after the vote, and I caught up with Kim, and I'd messaged her before the vote and said, Kim, whichever way it goes, will you come and speak to me? And she said, I might be in floods of tears, Beth, if it doesn't pass, but I will come out even if I'm in floods of tears and speak to you. Well, she came out and I said to her, well, you're not in floods of tears. And she said, I feel like I could be because it has been so emotional.
It is emotional. And I actually feel, as somebody who supported this a long time and had quite a long journey on this, like I say, I made my maiden speech 3 years ago when there was a private member's bill in the Lords about this and my support for it. And I've, and it really does kind of get you right here. But I do feel for people on the other side too, because their fear and their worry and their anxiety is not synthetic, it's genuine. And I think one of the things that has been so remarkable about the way this topic has been approached, both in the Commons and elsewhere, in the Isle of Man where it's been discussed already, in the Scottish Parliament where it's been discussed, in the Lords where it was discussed 3 years ago, is that people come to it sometimes from very different arguments, sometimes opposing arguments, but they come to it with a sense of good faith. And actually at its heart, everybody wants better for people that are in a terrible situation. And one of the things that I think is going to really come out of this is the pressure on the Health Minister, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, to put palliative care further up the agenda as he tries to fix the NHS and get it back on its feet after COVID, because everybody agrees this is not an either or. Palliative care in this country is not good enough. And even if this passes all of the other bits it's got to pass, the committee stage and the Lords and everything else, even if it passes, that doesn't negate the need for us to get our finger out and really look at these people in their final few days, weeks and months.
I mean, it was quite something watching this debate because I sat in for the entire thing. And on both sides, the interventions were so heartfelt. There was story after story, be it MPs telling personal stories, be it MPs talking about constituents on both sides. And it was a strange thing, really, because party politics were put aside. There was profound disagreement in that chamber, but somehow it was unified in this sense of it needed to be respectful. It clearly weighed heavily on every single MP. It was difficult at times, to be honest, about which way it would go, because every argument in a different way felt so persuasive for and against. And Ruth, you were talking about kind of people that were opposed to it. I mean, I thought Danny Kruger articulated the opposition in such an eloquent way, where he talked about, Kim had said, you know, this is only about a few people. It's about the end of life. It's about autonomy, about how you die. This is not about life and death. And then Danny Kruger stood up and said, it isn't about a few people, because it will change the way death affects all of us. It will be a conversation around all the bedsides where, you know, a relative will whisper, is it time? That it will change all of our lives. And I found on both sides, the arguments were so compelling. I mean, one of my reflections was that it really was an impressive moment for the House of Commons, that such a complicated, emotive issue could be discussed in a philosophical, a moral, and a very sensitive way. I mean, it really was a moment where, as I said, party politics were gone, and it was something deeper than that. Harriet, I have never seen a debate like that in the Commons that was so compelling, that was so extraordinary just in the interventions and the depth of feeling and the emotion, but the solemnness of it as well. Harriet, what was it like for you?
I thought it was absolutely an extraordinary day of debate, and I haven't seen anything like it at the previous debate on assisted dying, I suppose because there wasn't the sense that it really might get through. But I think that I was incredibly proud of Parliament today. I think it was Parliament at its finest. That's often an overused phrase, but it absolutely was. And I was very proud of each individual MP who spoke, because normally MPs are sort of tribal and in a herd. You're in a group. But at that moment when they were voting and when they were speaking, every MP was an individual with their conscience making a decision which was going to be so impactful on everybody for decades to come. So you could see that although House of Commons was packed, each one was quite alone with their decision. And I think the debate, I hope a lot of people look at the debate, because actually we can be proud of our parliamentarians. There was not a single speech where I had my head in my hands thinking, what a prat, I wish they hadn't said that. They were really saying things from very opposing views, but every speech was a really fine speech and a credit to Parliament.
Now, there is some things that Parliament can do at this stage forward to make this a better bill. And we're moving now to the committee stage. Kim Leadbeater, because she's introduced the bill, gets to choose who sits on the committee, and she's committed to making sure there's a balance of how the vote went. So she wants to make sure that everybody gets their say, and she wants to make sure that the people that she picks from the other side who've got concerns, who are against this, are people that have a deep knowledge, that have got a conviction, that can make sure that these genuinely held anxieties that some people have are allayed in this. So, we also have the Lords, and we've got a lot of subject matter experts in the Lords on areas of health and areas of end of life. So, I mean, there's a long way to travel here, but I really hope as well that the government gives up some of its governmental time to allow this to happen, which they can do. They can donate some of their parliamentary time to this to allow us to make sure that when it comes forward for third reading, and that's the big one that says whether it becomes a law or not, that it's really been kicked around and people have had their say, and they think they've got the best possible way forward here.
And actually, I spoke to some of Wes Streeting's colleagues about it this week, and despite his opposition to the bill, which, Harriet, I know you felt very strongly about, I was given assurances from those around him that, he will weigh in now and make the bill, if it passed, as good as they could make it. So there will will there be a sort of a big government push? I mean, I interviewed Danny Kruger after in the central lobby, the bit outside the Commons that you sometimes see on your telly when all the MPs come out after the vote. And he basically said his instinct is that this bill it's impossible to put in the safeguards that will give him reassurance. But he said he does want to at least try to amend the bill to be the best version it can be. although he did say to me that he can't see himself voting for it. But I think there is an admission, at least, of those such as Danny who are opposed to it, that the momentum now is for this to pass. It is what the majority of the country have said according to polling, and having been voted down in 2015, and apparently the last vote before that was 20 years before that too, so the late 1990s, that it probably is going to come into law.
Well, I think there's a number of things that are going to happen now. As far as West Streeting and the Department of Health is concerned, now MPs have given it the go-ahead in principle. They'll be doing two things, I think. The first is an impact assessment and working out all the technical things that might need to change were this to become law, which we expect now it will. But the other is that they will be moving up the agenda the question of hospices and palliative care, which have languished at the bottom of the political agenda for too long. I think what this debate is going to have done is two things. Firstly, to usher in a new right, if you're terminally ill, to die at a time of your own choosing if you're within 6 months of death. And the other is to move the question of how the NHS and community care supports people who are at the end of life. So I think that's two major steps forward. But as far as the committee, the next process in the House of Commons is concerned, there'll be about 17 MPs on it. Normally, they're just in proportion to each party. So the governing party has more MPs and the official opposition has a certain number of MPs. But it's not like that with this committee, because, of course, this debate and this vote did not go down party lines. So they'll be looking to balance the committee between those who voted for and those who voted against, but also to get a geographical representation as well. And they will go through it, I think, not just to fob off those who didn't vote against it and are against it in principle, but it'll be the search to make it a better bill if that is possible. So I think they'll be open-minded to amendments. They won't just say this is the bill and try and roll it through, although they'll have a majority on the committee. They'll be searching for, listening to ways for how to get it through. And they'll also be talking to those MPs who voted against it, but who are not on the committee, because it will come back to the House of Commons. And there are 275 MPs who voted against it, and they will be wanting to reassure them and hear from them how they think the bill should be improved. And then it will go to the Lords, the House of Lords, where Ruth and I will get a chance to speak about it, amend it and vote on it before it then goes back to the House of Commons again. And it's got to do all of this before November next year.
I want to just circle back to Kim before we just quickly talk about how it did divide along lines and what did the PMs do. We've talked a lot about Kim. You guys have heard the voice note. She said, I didn't want to come into politics. She sits in her murdered sister Jo Cox's seat, which she won in a by-election. She said she didn't much enjoy being an MP. She said, didn't she, on that voice note, that she did it because she wanted to make a difference. At the end of the interview, I'm afraid I did actually tear up here. I have to admit, I found it. Yeah, when you're on telly and you kind of you think you're going to burst into tears, it's not the best look. But I said to her at the end of our interview, what do you think Jo would have thought? I did it because I thought she came into politics in memory of her sister, which she didn't want to do, and she's come out of it now, having put through into legislation potentially the biggest societal change that we will probably see in our lifetimes.
Since David Steele passed the Abortion Act.
And there she is, and she has affected change for people that really care about it. So I asked her about Jo, and she said,
I think about Jo every day. I've thought about her a lot in the last few months. I haven't talked about her very much, but I think about her all the time. Jo went into politics to make a difference. I've done exactly the same, and I know she'd be extremely proud. She voted for a similar bill back in 2015. So, yeah, I think she'd be very proud. And she'd be very proud, actually, of the way that Parliament has conducted itself today, as am I. I've got huge respect for everybody who's spoken today, and I think the debate was done in a really professional and respectful manner, and that's what Jo believed in, and it's what I believe in.
I'm not usually a tearful person, but I could cry my eyes out thinking about those two sisters. I mean, what a remarkable pair of sisters they are. And I do think that Kim Leadbeater is a historical figure now, the outstanding parliamentarian, not just of this parliament, but of this generation. She made it look simple in terms of the process, but listening and being patient and being open to hearing other people is not simple. I haven't got a scrap of the patience that she showed and the openness. And her sister's big maiden speech talked about that we've got more in common than divides us. And what Kim has done as put that into practice and put that into action, I think she is a remarkable historic figure.
You know, Ruth, your colleague Kit Malthouse, Conservative MP, next door neighbours actually to Danny Kruger, and he is passionately for this bill. He was one of actually not loads of Conservatives. We'll break it down. I think only 23 Conservatives out of 121 is it, voted for it. And he sort of said of Kim, it's like when you stand up and you have to put this forward and he said it's like a blowtorch coming back at you about how people feel about it, and you are just in that and you've got to front it up. And you know the toll it must have taken on her because of, and I'm sure Danny Kruger's had it as well. Like when you put yourself out there, like it's brave, isn't it?
It is brave, and it's exposing, and it's isolating, and it's all of these other things. And it doesn't matter how many people give you a WhatsApp message to say, oh, well done on publishing the bill or getting to the stage or any of that, because the bits that you take home at night are the bits where you've got people that are online or in your inbox or in your mailbox, and they're calling you, all of the devils under the sun. And I cannot for the life of me imagine some of the hate mail that she's had in the last few months since her name came up at the top of the ballot for a private member's bill.
And she will have thought to herself, is this the right thing? Are the critics right? Am I doing something terrible? She will have been soul-searching. So
she
it does take, as Ruth said, incredible courage.
Because she is a thoughtful person. And Harriet's completely right. There was a way where there are other personalities in the House of Commons that could have brought forward the exact same bill and not had the same result today, because they wouldn't have gone about introducing it in the manner that she has, working with people who have concerns to alleviate those concerns, to make sure that she was as open as she was, as welcoming of criticism and suggestion as she was. She is a kind of uniting figure, and I think what's really interesting as well is you talked about the kind of voting, Beth, and you were right. We talked in the earlier pod, so the one that's already been out, and this is the supplement after the vote's been, and we talked about how there was a split in Labour and a split in the Tories, and the Tories would be more against than for, and the Labour Party would be more for than against, and that actually the party we've very rarely talked about since the election, and it's now the biggest it's ever been, which is the Lib Dems, could hold the key, and they did. 61.
Can I just pause Ruth there and just remind everybody who's listening to this pod that Ruth was spot on this and predicting, so we've all got to be listening to Ruth's predictions.
You need to listen to the earlier episode.
Absolutely.
I don't think
you were right. You were right.
But I don't think I was unique in seeing the way the numbers were beginning to break up, and that if there was a block of around 60 or slightly more than that Lib Dems, that would be enough to see this over the line, and that's what happened. It passed by 55 votes, and 61 Lib Dems voted for it. And
that's
it's
exactly
an odd,
right.
Yeah, it's an odd twist that because the Lib Dem leader is against it, Ed Davey, for many of his own personal reasons, and he's talked very eloquently about being a full-time carer for his severely disabled son, and talks about how we need to sort out the caring side of things and social care. That actually maybe the Lib Dems perhaps won't see this as one of their kind of achievements in this parliament, but I think it is.
You're spot on there that it was kind of the Lib Dems, 61 out of the 72 voted for.
And also just in terms of the electoral arithmetic, if you look down the voting list, there are no SNP MPs that voted for it. That's not because they don't care or anything like that. They have a self-denying ordinance that because this only relates to England and Wales,
yes,
they will not vote.
And actually, Ruth, just to hammer that home, and Harriet, I'm interested in getting your reaction to this. Of Labour's 402 MPs, 234 voted for. You might have thought that more at Labour MPs tend to be, don't they, more socially liberal, more progressive in terms of social policy, historically. Is that fair to say, Harriet? Are you surprised that it passed by 55? Are you surprised that that few relatively of Labour MPs supported it?
Well, as you say, there was a majority of Labour MPs who supported it, but I was surprised by the number of Labour MPs who opposed it, including many of the new MPs. I think it's easy to assume that with something socially liberal, something progressive, something radical, something new, that new MPs would feel that they were going to vote for it, new Labour MPs. But actually, there was a large chunk of the Parliamentary Labour Party who voted against it, as well as there being a chunk of Conservative MPs, of which Kit Malthouse was an exemplar, who voted for it. So it didn't break down along party lines in the way you might have thought about it.
Do you think that was maybe because of that intervention from Wes Streeting? Because the NHS is almost a religion in Labour circles, and him coming out and saying, if you do this, now's not the time because it will damage the NHS. We don't have the capacity to do this at the same time. We're trying to fix it. Come back in 5 years when we've got a handle on things. I think that's quite a significant intervention.
I think those who were having doubts, their doubts were reinforced by Wes Streeting, so it might have given them the confidence to vote against. But also, when the three former Tory Prime Ministers, Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, came out against the bill, those who were promoting the bill had a very nervous moment because it really shifted the Tories, the Tory MPs, many fewer of them voted for the bill than had previously been going to. So that was an important moment of intervention. But despite that, obviously, it went through.
It went through and Keir Starmer did vote for it. I thought he would.
But big splits.
So 15 cabinet members voted for, 8 voted against.
Exactly, and big hitters like David Lammy as well as Wes Streeting that we knew about beforehand. Although the Chancellor voted for, I believe. I think Rachel Reeves voted for.
Yeah, Rachel Reeves voted for, but yes, David Lammy, Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, they were some of them that voted against. Johnny Reynolds. But anyway, but it passed, and I imagine that probably privately Keir Starmer did not like the interventions that his cabinet made. But, you know, as I said, it's now the job of government to try and get this bill into shape, right?
And if it's served not only to make sure that the safeguards are as tight as they absolutely possibly can be and need to be, but also if it's served to move up the political agenda, the question of palliative care and hospice care within the Department of Health, then Wes Streeting's got a really important role to play going forward.
Well, look, let's just move on to something else, because another person that went through the voting lobbies, despite having a pretty torrid past 24 hours, was Louise Haigh, who was the Transport Secretary and resigned. Let's just quickly talk about this, because overnight Louise Haigh has resigned as Transport Secretary. It was after Sky News, my colleagues Rob Powell and Alex Rogers revealed a story that Louise Haigh had had a criminal conviction. She pleaded guilty to an offence related to incorrectly telling the police that a work mobile phone had been stolen in 2013. Now, I have to say this all happened before she became an MP. It was over 10 years ago, but it has emerged that she had had a criminal conviction. She said it was all a mistake, that she had been mugged. She thought her phone had been stolen. She subsequently found it. She did not tell her employer that at the time, and it was a great regret to her. But this morning she resigned, saying that she did not want to be a distraction in government. It's been a rough 24 hours, hasn't it, Harriet? Not just for Louise Haigh, but this is not great for Sir Keir Starmer, not least because Louise Haigh made the point in her statement last night before she resigned that the government, that they were aware of this situation she had had. What did you think, Harriet, when you heard the news?
Well, I think she's a loss to government, because I think she's incredibly able. And if you look at just in the 4 short months that she's been Transport Secretary, you know, she settled a strike so that rail services are working better. She's taken through the railways privatisation bill. She's got more money in the budget for buses. She's even done something very detailed at Euston Station, whereby she's got them to tell passengers a bit more in advance what their platform is so they don't get crushed in the rush, being told just 2 minutes before the train's about to depart. So I think she's a very able person. But I think what this is based on and where this goes is that Keir Starmer said he was going to be a change, a big change from Boris Johnson, who seemed to think that he can break the law in Partygate and just carry on as if nothing had happened. And Keir Starmer said you can't be a lawbreaker and a lawmaker. And that's why he said that if he had a fixed penalty notice, he would resign. And we were all holding our breath, hoping that he wouldn't get a fixed penalty notice. And that was what hung over the head of Angela Rayner when there was all the pressurising her about in relation to her tax and her house purchase. So he has set the bar very high. I think he's recognised the public want high standards from MPs, and he said, in my government, the standards are high. But what he's done here is he's set them super high, because this is just a conditional discharge, which hardly rates as a penalty. I think it was a conviction because she pleaded guilty, but clearly the magistrates thought it was so insignificant they weren't even going to impose any penalty on her. So that is now the benchmark.
Do you think she's been hard done by, Harriet?
Well, I think Keir Starmer has taken a line about zero tolerance for those who are in his government in relation to convictions for criminal offences. So he has set the bar that they've got to hold very high standards, and therefore now that's a good thing for the public, because everybody will know that he's going to set very high standards for all his ministers. But it'll be a bit of an unnerving thing for cabinet ministers, because they'll know that whatever they've done in the past, even if it might have been seen quite minor, even if it was a spent conviction, even if it only had a conditional discharge, it's going to bar them from remaining in government.
You know, as much as a Tory tribalist, I'm quite happy to see the first, Labour scalp come out of cabinet, etc. But aside from all of that, we forget everything that is about Louise Haigh, and we look at the principle of this, because the principle seems to be that if you have ever had a conviction on anything, however minor, whether it's spent and expired long before you even enter Parliament, there is no place for you in government. And I'm not sure if that sits well with me, actually. I don't know, does it sit well with you?
Well, I think that's what's the implications of what he's actually said. And as I say, you can see why he's saying that. But I think that whatever the background of the case, the facts are that she had a conditional discharge. And the facts are that on the basis of that conditional discharge, whatever the facts were, that is enough for Keir Starmer to feel that actually he couldn't support her staying in government. So that is where the benchmark is now set. And it made me think a bit wryly of my own brush with the law when I was Solicitor General and responsible for the prosecution service, the Crown Prosecution Service. The Solicitor General is the minister responsible for the Crown Prosecution Service. And it's a bit of a long story, but I was driving my son back to university in my husband's car, which of course was much more powerful than my own jalopy, and found myself surprisingly going at a shameful and astonishing 99 miles an hour, pulled up by the police. And I immediately I rang up my government department and I said, I'm going to be pleading guilty because I've got no defence. I'm going to be pleading guilty. I've broken the law, so I'll have to resign. And they said, were you on the phone when you were driving at 99 miles an hour? And I said, no. And they said, were you drunk when you were driving at 99 miles an hour? And I said, no. And they said, well, that's all right. So I just basically pleaded guilty, was banned, and stayed in government. So that, I think, in Keir Starmer's government, I would not have survived.
So you were the actual Solicitor General, and you were hooring around the country at 100 miles an hour, whiling.
Well, it was 99.
Harriet.
I knew she was racy,
but actually, I shouldn't really even be laughing about it, and I'm not really, because I agree with the fact that speed limits are important and speed kills and everything, and it was a bad thing to be doing, and I was right to be stopped, and I was right to be convicted.
I know, but come on, Harriet, you being a bit naughty is appealing. I'm just saying it now.
I tell you what, though, it's not running through a field of wheat, is it?
No, it's proper.
Proper.
Can I just ask something else, though, which is quite interesting, because Ruth, you're party are now making the point, though, and this is why I think it could be a bit sticky for Starmer, Harriet, which is, what did the PM know when? So he thought it was okay to put Louise Haigh into that post, and now it isn't. Now, just to give you a sense of kind of how much traction this could have, the Prime Minister's spokesperson was asked this about 40 times in the lobby briefing today, and they sort of went round and round and round in a circle for about half an hour about what did Keir Starmer know when. And I think the Prime Minister's spokesperson has refused to confirm about... Haigh says she told Starmer about the conviction when she became Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary in 2020. Sources say apparently he was very supportive, but now the Prime Minister's spokesperson is refusing to confirm that. Number 10 sources suggesting that she didn't disclose the full details. I think she was pretty quickly shown the door when this did emerge. But he's in a bit of hot water, isn't he? Harriet, what do you think?
If it is the case that he was fine with it until the press found out, then that's a whole different kettle of fish than whether he thought it was unacceptable as a point of principle. I actually, as I say, I'm a little bit uneasy with how it all sits anyway. If it is as described, she got mugged, loads of stuff got nicked. She thought a phone was one of the things that got nicked, and it turned up later. And her solicitor suggested that she just, take the knuckle wrap to get rid of it. It's a story that actually makes very little sense to me. But if it is as described, then, I mean, I'm not sure Keir wouldn't have been perfectly within his rights to turn down the resignation, to be honest with you. But, I mean, who knows what happened 11 years ago.
You know what I thought about this morning, Harriet, when I saw it? I thought if Louise Haigh, when she had become a politician, perhaps when she'd become a shadow cabinet minister, had fronted this, had put it out there, had done an interview about it even, and got it all out there and out in the open, it might have been that she could have weathered this. I think it happening and coming out that you've had a conviction when you are in cabinet and under that level of scrutiny, it does make it hard to survive, doesn't it?
Well, I think there's two things. One is the legal rules, and it is a spent conviction. But the other is the kind of court of public opinion and the question of transparency, which is at a higher standard for cabinet ministers. And I should imagine she just thought that because it was a spent conviction, it was not something that she had to declare. So I think the level of transparency that Keir is requiring, as well as the level of legal compliance across the piece that he's requiring, is a high standard. But I don't think it's the question of him replacing with a left-wing person with a right-wing person, because actually Heidi Alexander, who is now the new Transport Secretary, is a very capable, competent person with a lot of transport experience. She was Sadiq Khan's deputy mayor for transport in London for a number of years. So I think, she'll do a good job, much as I'm very sad to see Louise Haigh go.
I mean, just from a comms point of view and a media point of view, and Ruth, you know, as a fellow old hack, not that you're old, but I mean a former hack. I don't know, that didn't come out right. It's been a long day, you know what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not old. You're actually younger than me. So if you're old, I'm positive geriatric.
You're entering your prime.
Look, there's nothing wrong with being old. Can we just clarify this?
No, it's great being old.
Exactly. You're in your prime. So am I.
You are in your prime, racy Harriet Harman.
So what was the question, Beth?
As a comms strategy, though, Ruth, I know there is all this stuff about what did Starmer know when, and let's see how difficult Louise Haigh chooses to be or not be. But at least they acted quickly. They didn't let it drag on. You know that thing, like if the story's on the front page for 3 days, you're done. Like at least they didn't let it drag on and on and on and on. It broke last night at 7:00. And by 6 a.m. this morning, I woke up with a little ping on my phone and there was the resignation letter, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really was quick. I mean, quick to the point where he almost didn't finish his letter. There's 3 sentences. It's the briefest, most concise thank you for your service letter I've ever seen in my life, from even when it's somebody that's embarrassed the government by resigning in a fit of pique. It gets more than, thanks, I'm sure you'll be back, see ya, which is basically what it was. So he did leave the door open for it, though. I don't expect her to create a lot of problems, because this is a government that's got probably quite a long time ahead of it, and it's got people with experience that need to run departments. So she could well be back.
I'm sure she will hope that she will come back, and I'm sure today she's feeling pretty bloody sore, but she did turn up to vote on the assisted dying bill today. Look, I'm really glad we did that. I'm really glad we found out about Harriet's.
I mean, do you know what? I'm trying to think if I've ever been as naughty as Harriet Harman, and now I feel a little bit sad that I don't think I have been.
Oh, I've definitely been naughty. But look.
But it's been a historic day, hasn't it?
It has
absolutely
been.
Up there.
What are you going to do to kick back this weekend, ladies?
Well, I'm about to drive to Edinburgh Airport and pick up 2 friends of my partner's who are over from Ireland, and we are having a lovely weekend with her friends, and we're also taking our son to Panto tomorrow.
Oh, now you're talking.
So I'm going up to Scotland for the Scottish Labour Women's Conference, but before that, tonight, I'm off to the Snowman with all my grandchildren.
Look at that.
Oh, yeah, you're going for a burger, aren't you?
Yeah,
aren't
and
you?
then the Snowman. But then Scottish Women's Conference
and
tomorrow.
All we're hearing from the back seat is, don't let Granny drive.
And I'm making Christmas wreaths with my friends. We do it every year.
Aww.
I am officially middle-aged. I cannot
In your
wait.
prime.
I bet you have cocktails as well, though. I bet it's cocktails.
There might be a dirty martini or two, Harriet. I couldn't possibly comment. But look, you can get in touch whenever. WhatsApp us on the burner phone 07934 200 444. Email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. The burner phone is 07934 200 444. I realised I said that really fast the first time. And please send us in. I'd love if you did sit and listen to some of the debate as well. Please send me in what you thought, because it really did feel like a moment where politics often just lives within Westminster, and this debate, this journey has kind of gone all around the country. It felt like that to me. So please send us in your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you, and have lovely weekends. Lady, thanks for doing an emergency pod.
See you later. Good weekend.
I'll see you soon.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye.